Blockades are common in the Star Wars universe. The principle is pretty simple. Put some ships in space around a blockaded planet and prevent anyone from coming or going. However, when watching The Phantom Menace, you might notice that the Trade Federation only blockades a portion of the planet. And the obvious question is, can't you just go around or avoid the blockade altogether? That's what we'll be trying to answer today. First, let's take a closer look at how hyperspace travel actually works. Hyperdrives do not allow a vehicle to enter hyperspace and just willy-nilly travel between any 2 points in the galaxy. Major sources of gravity like planets and black holes complicate jumps and can either pull ships out of space or just destroy them outright.
Traveling through hyperspace ain't like dust and crops, boy. Without precise calculations, we'd fly right through a star or bounce too close to a supernova and then it'd end your trip real quick, wouldn't it?
Thankfully, the galaxy also had millions of hyperspace lanes, routes which were clear of hyperspace shadows or other threats and were thus safe for travel. The largest of these were called super hyperlanes, and some, like the Hydian Way, stretched through the entire galaxy, and travel was generally limited to hyperlanes. As a side note, for those interested, I've done entire videos on how the formation and discovery of hyperlanes helped shape the demographics of the galaxy. But back on topic. Hyperlanes were natural things, and new hyperlanes could be discovered, but the process was generally limited to galactic governments, who had not only the computing power, but usually the automated drones to do the process, and it took a long time. Regardless, it's not something that would be done on the fly. Many hyperlanes were also kept secret and used for military or commercial purposes, while others, like the Endor pipeline, were artificially held open by technology, though this was an extremely difficult and expensive process. Hyperlanes were fixed, and to enter a lane from a planet, you would need the correct trajectory, orientation, and data for your navicomputer. This data would have to be constantly updated due to the movement of stellar bodies, which made travel in certain portions of space, like the deep core, very difficult and even impossible without up-to-date data. Hyperlanes comprised multiple planets, which were almost like stops along a bus route, and a ship's navicomputer would set the exit point. Many planets were serviced by only a single hyperlane, while others, planetary hubs, saw multiple lines converge. These planets usually grew to prominence within the galaxy due to the trade naturally brought in by spaceships leaving one hyperlane and jumping on another. But practically, let's say you want to leave a planet. First, you have to get clear of that planet's gravity well, as it prevents travel. Then you approach the hyperlane entry, which would sometimes be called an egress point. And a great way to illustrate the limits of hyperspace is a closer look at the Battle of Evac 9 from the Yuuzhan Vong War. Briefly, the New Republic managed to lure the Yuuzhan Vong to the deep core planet of Evac 9. The deep core is an extremely busy and dangerous portion of space, and Evac only had one well-known charted hyperspace lane into or out of the planet, and the lane didn't travel through the planet, but actually ended there. The Vong, thinking they had their enemy trapped, blockaded and attacked Evac 9, one of Evac's moons. However, the New Republic had managed to negotiate secret hyperspace routes through the deep core from the Empire. Using these, they were able to attack at the flanks of the Vong, who thought themselves secure from any sort of rear attack. The New Republic also placed mines across the hyperroute, which would pull the Vong out of space should they attempt to retreat. So they secured a major victory because they had a better knowledge of local space and were able to make themselves seem unaware of attack. And I bring this example up because it well illustrates many of the principles that go into blockading a planet. So, in the vast majority of cases, a faction simply won't have enough ships to cover all space around a planet. Thus, what they'll do is sit on the edge of a planet's gravity well, but before the hyperspace egress point. So, the only way for a ship to escape is to actually run the blockade, get to the jump point, calculate the jump, which is an instant even on an established lane, and then leave. This is obviously extremely difficult because they're facing resistance from the blockade. And one of the most common devices used to help a faction prevent an escape is Interdiction Fields. Interdictors block hyperspace jumps, essentially pushing the egress point even further back. This means that ships have to travel very far at subspace speeds to actually make the jump to hyperspace, all again while facing resistance from the fleet. So if you're the Empire with an Interdictor Star Destroyer, just place your Interdictor at the egress point. At Dathomir, the Hapes Consortium prevented Zinja's retreat with the use of hyperspace mines, as the New Republic did at Evac. However, it's also important to note that blockades are meant to stop ships from coming in as much as ships from escaping. Many planets were not self-sufficient and relied on trade. The blockade of Naboo, for example, especially when combined with a planetary occupation, was meant to starve the planet out. Single ships can often slip through a blockade, especially if they're small and fast, but a proper blockade can mostly stop freighters or large passenger vessels from getting through. Let's go back to Naboo. Besides for cinematic reasons, we can assume the Trade Federation ships were placed where they were because that's where the hyperspace lane ran. Now, most maps of Naboo have it as just a point along a longer lane rather than an end, so from a strict lore sense, the blockade should have been on the other side of the planet as well, but I think we can understand why that wasn't shown. Now, one vulnerability here is that ships technically can leave the planet as it's not fully embraced by the blockade, but as long as the hyperspace lane is covered, they won't be able to get off system. So aside from trying to mount a defense, there's not much they can do. However, a careful faction can even mitigate against this. The Trade Federation, as I said, occupied Naboo itself and kept a local population subjugated and shot down any escaping ships, or at least attempted to. Those in space also have singular control of the area around the planet and should be able to pick up any enemies on sensors and respond with fast movers. Sometimes during a siege, the blockaded world will have a planetary shield. This prevents not only ships from getting down to the surface, but, as we saw during Thrawn's siege of Coruscant, from leaving. As a note, some shields can open specific sections to covertly allow fighters out while maintaining most of the planet's defense, so protecting the exit point is still important. Other technology is often employed during a blockade, including mines, of both the interdiction and standard variety, as well as communication chambers. During the Corellian Crisis, Centerpoint Station was used to create a gigantic interdictor field, which essentially blockaded the system by limiting ships to sublight travel. As a note, Star Wars Legends has what's called a hyperwave inertial momentum sustainer, which allows ships to maintain some speed while passing through an interdiction field, allowing them to enter even a blocked off system, like Corellia in this example. However, they can't jump out of an interdiction field, and this still doesn't stop them from having to face the fleet itself. Of course, much of what we discussed can be bypassed by secret hyperspace lanes and egresses, support especially from outside the planet, i.e. if you have another fleet come to destroy the blockade, and more. Nonetheless, they were still a very effective technique in the Star Wars universe. Today's question comes from Ben Jackson, who asks about the Endor system, specifically whether the forest moon of Endor means that Endor is the planet or the moon. That's a good question. However, confusingly, Endor was the name of the moon, the gas giant, and the system itself. So the term forest moon of Endor is ambiguous, as it is a forested moon named Endor and a forested moon of the gas giant Endor. The moon is also known as the Sanctuary Moon, which I quite like. As a note, that name is a holdover from the original Revenge of the Jedi script, where Endor was a sort of nature sanctuary around the planet Had Abaddon. Anyway guys, that's all for today. If you've got a question, make sure to leave it down below with the hashtag AskEck. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like. As a note, when doing research, I did discover that Star Wars Explained made a similar video, so if you'd like to learn more about hyperspace, hyperlanes, and blockades, especially related to canon, I'll put that link to the video down in the comments. Until next time guys, this has been EckhartsLadder. May the Force be with you.